Hi, I'm Kina, and welcome to our second episode of People for Peace and Justice. This year is the Peace and Justice's 40th birthday, so we're going to be talking about some of the things that we've achieved over the years and kind of just going through the history of the center. I've been working here for almost 2 years now, and it's been amazing to see all of the things that we've achieved in the last 2 years, so I'm really excited to get to hear from Wendy and Jean, who have been here since day one, to hear about what their experience has been like and some of the highlights for them.
Cool.
So just for total transparency, Jean and I are married. So if we sound like a married couple, we throw that in for Valentine's Day.
Wait. And how did you meet?
And we met through what was originally called the Burlington Peace Coalition, which started in January of 1979. And we got married in 1985, so a few years went by. But anyway.
I was not at the very beginning, but Ronald Reagan had this crazy idea that you could win a nuclear war. Mm-hmm. Absolutely insane, although apparently President Trump thinks the same thing too. And I was living in Colchester, and you could see Plattsburgh from my house. And that was a Strategic Air Command base where they had B-52s that carried nuclear weapons. So that would be a target. And I went, this is just insane. I have to get back into an anti-war movement. I had been active with Vietnam, anti-Vietnam war activities. So that brought me into the Peace and Justice Center, where I met some amazing people, like my sweetheart here.
So back then, we actually didn't have a center. We were just a group of people, and the anti-nuclear power movement had been strong, and we started with anti-nuclear weapons. That was our original activist programs that we did. And we used to run Thinking Globally and Acting Locally conferences at City Hall. We met at the UU, we met at homes, we met in different places. And we always had a dream to actually have a center. And in 1983, Robin Lloyd had a store. It was called the Peace on Earth store in the old Ben & Jerry's gas station. And we just opened it for 2 months. We made a $4,000 nest egg, which back then was just a huge amount of money. And in the middle of 1984, we started renting a place at 186 College Street. And I'm just going to cover this part right now, but we'll go back. In 1991, we moved to the basement on Church Street, where we were for 18 years, so a lot of people might know that. Here's an old drawing of what that place looked like. But it had mold and stuff, and then we finally moved to Lake Street 10 years ago in 2009. And we were a coalition up until 1995, when we decided that we were a coalition of all these activist groups who had to do their own fundraising and their own programs. And we had just become more of a real place. So we decided to call the organization the Peace and Justice Center and do fundraising specifically for that. But as a segue, we had a lot of fun in the 80s. One of my 15 minutes of fame was June 12th, 1982, when over 2,000 Vermonters went to New York City for the biggest anti-nuke demonstration ever. And
how many people were there there?
There was like 1 million people there.
That's
but
a lot
outside of New Yorkers, the organizers said that Vermont had the highest per capita representation there. And it was just a very exciting time. And that in 1981 and 1982 were when Vermont towns, and in total there were 177 Vermont towns that had the nuclear weapons freeze resolution on the town meeting ballots. And what was then the Burlington Peace Coalition organized, we did it In 1981, there were 17 towns, and we were the main organizer for that, producing the literature and getting other towns involved. And then the following year, a lot of other towns thought it was a good idea and followed suit. So that was a very a huge achievement for us. And I guess in 7 Days recently, there was an article, and that author said that it didn't achieve anything, and we beg to differ.
Totally. I mean, think about this. Ronald Reagan says you can win nuclear war, and he embarks on this major arms race. And the world is freaking out. Mm-hmm. So we play a part in this global movement to say, stop. Europeans are marching by the millions against the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, the Euro missiles, right? In the United States, we have the nuclear freeze movement, which was what the town meeting votes are doing. And then you've got 1 million people out in the street that say, stop this insanity. And what was really interesting is at a certain point, Ronald Reagan said, I have to do something to subvert this global movement against what I'm doing. And as a result, he and Gorbachev got together, and then he had this epiphany, which is, how about we abolish all nuclear weapons? It's like, whoa, now we're thinking. So when people say that we didn't do anything, that people didn't say anything, I mean, Jonathan Schell, this great journalist, wrote a book called The Fate of the Earth. And to be quite honest, the fate of the earth was and continues to be in our hands. I mean, you were not born then. I mean, we held your fate in our hands. And I think for a little bit of time, we turned that doomsday clock that many people hear about back, from 1 minute before midnight to maybe 5 or 6. So, I mean, this was an amazing time. I mean, we also, the caravan that are coming to the border right now, they're coming from El Salvador. They're coming from Honduras. They're coming from Guatemala. Well, it's no surprise that these people are the result, the legacy of U.S. imperial power and policy in Central America in the 1980s that armed death squads and killer governments and tried to overthrow the government of Nicaragua through their base in Honduras and unleash this horror. So we're living with the legacy of those right-wing crazy policies. And I'm really proud, I mean, it really touches me that we could, through the Peace and Justice Center, play this part to try to stop that. We did stop funding to the bloody regime in El Salvador. We did, help to stop a Contra war in Nicaragua and deal with that. So, the Peace and Justice Center has been at really a critical position when it comes to things that have these long-lasting effects. And we see the effects today. The idiot in the White House is trying to renuclearize our military and our defense posture. So there's a place for us, and our history is really important, I think, to do.
So wait, the things you're talking about reminds me of something that I say to any new group of interns we have. It's a way I have of summarizing our mission statement, and that racism and poverty are the roots to war. And so we work on the interconnected issues of racial and economic justice and peace and human rights. That's our mission. And so I'm going to sort of segue into the 90s. So in the 1990s, we actually went into the economic and racial justice aspects even more, fighting NAFTA and starting the job gap study, and also doing racial justice work, especially with John Tucker working with the staff. So we did things like we got block grants from the city to do anti-racism trainings with all 600 city employees, and I think with all Howard Center employees, and so we have done anti-racism work in different manners all the way up to current day, where we do a lot of our racial justice programming in schools now and with community groups. The other thing that happened that I didn't want to forget was, so in the 90s, we started something called the Job Gap Study. And we got this grant to do it. It was an interesting story. Our executive director, Ellen Kaler, talked to this person at a foundation. I'm forgetting if it was like the Ford Foundation. It was some big foundation. And basically, job gap studies had been done in big cities in different parts of the country, but they hadn't been done on a whole state before. And this guy said to Ellen, and she said to him, I think that you just don't believe that I can do this. And so will you come and visit and spend 2 days here and let me have a chance to convince you? And she basically talked him into it. And part of that was the person who we hired to write the job gap study is Doug Hoffer, who is one smart person, and he's now our state auditor, which I just am totally thrilled about. But we changed the minimum wage. We got this COLA thing put in, and obviously the work that is happening now is the logical progression of that for the $15 an hour. But we really made the state legislature focus in on what it costs to live in the state of Vermont. And we consider that part of the Peace and Justice Center, it's justice. And if you want peace, you have to work for justice. And we really felt that people's basic economies, basic needs really needed to be met for people to have a good quality of life. And also during that time, I think you were on the board.
Yeah, I think in the 90s I was on the board. Yeah.
Can you talk about that experience?
Can I talk about, being on a board at the Peace and Justice Center is like being on a board for any of the nonprofits that are around, So you've got to deal with finances, and to be quite honest, our finances were always and are continuing to be always on the edge, which is right, because what you're trying to do is fundamentally change society. And the people with the power and the money are not likely to be funding that. Actually, Jerry Greenfield was on the board at the same time as I was, and he always said Wendy took care of the books, takes care of the books and the money. He says, we do not have a problem with spending. I trust Wendy to be able to make sure that every nickel is going to be spent correctly, every penny. And I think that continues to be true. So it's always been our ability to raise money, and it is a testament, I think, to both the people who have supported the Peace and Justice Center, and there are, I don't know how many members, but over the years there are thousands of individual Vermonters. It's sort of like when politicians, they raise millions of dollars on 27, I'm not mentioning the name of the person, the politician, but that's sort of what we do and what we did. So being on the board was always about that. Then
we don't get hardly any grants. The store is sort of a break-even kind of thing, and really it's community individual donations is what has kept us alive for 40 years. It's the only thing.
So, being on the board is a lot like any other board, as I was saying, about making sure the money is there. It's also about, for us, it was when I was on, about making sure that we're involved in the cutting edge issues of the time. So, I was on the board when George Bush had this brilliant idea, let's go invade Iraq. But the buildup for that was, took a while. So we had the opportunity on the board to, sort of position ourselves and to work with the executive director at that time, Chris Meehan, to be out there as a leader in a coalition to try to stop it before it started. We did not succeed, but we did our part and were proven correct. And just to be on the cutting edge for all of those issues. And I know now, I was down in the legislature, for example, last year, talking about the need to raise the minimum wage, and Nathan Suter, who's on the board now, was a representative for the Peace and Justice Center. And I gotta say, I was really proud at the job that Nathan did. I mean, he was so articulate and so spot on in both the emotion and the reason. It was a pleasure to have him represent, this organization that I care so much about. So being on the board was also about that. Wendy said that, like the old place downstairs on Church Street was kind of moldy, right? I thought it was kind of quaint, but that's my funkiness. But the decision to move was a board decision, and that was a tremendous gamble. Because it really stressed us at a time when our finances were not as good, where what few grants that we had were like drying up too. So that was, that was a move of faith, which I think, and you would, you better know than me, the ability to tell me whether that was that faith was founded or not, or whether it was a good thing to do.
Well, we're still around.
You're still around, so there we go.
People find us.
I think it's. So being on the board, there's a tremendous responsibility to see that we continue to take care of the little things, and that the little things are taken care of, while the big picture is still being focused on, because you can lose sight of it and just become a bureaucratic organization and cease to have any real meaning. And I think that that hasn't happened.
So in 2011 was the year like, should we keep existing or not? There was a whole lot of stuff around that, but and we had a community meeting, and the community basically said yes, and so we have pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we went very back to our very basic things that we've done. We were actually, our IRS status is as an educational organization, and we always believed in educating people rather than telling them what to believe or telling them what to do. The idea is to educate people, and then they will hopefully do what we want them to do. No, they'll figure it out if you give people information and treat them with respect, and that they've got a brain in their head. So,
so like you print this newsletter, right? This incredible newsletter that we
went back to doing educational workshops, and we have come into this at the 21st century, when we used to do 10 issues a year, and now we do 4, because everything is all done online. Though there's still a few baby boomers still left, so they like the paper, but
I like the paper.
and we give out the paper copies so often when we table at movie screenings or film screenings, or we partner. There's so many times when we give them out and people appreciate, while they're waiting for their film to start, reading the newsletter, and that's good for us. So I think it's beyond just the baby boomers that we print them. And there's a lot of value to it. Certainly,
right.
It's worth the paper.
So, boy, I can think of all these other things that we used to do, but I don't know. The fact that we're still here still amazes me. And I think that it's a testament to Kina and Kyle and Rachel and Amy and Alex, the other staff members, do with our program work. That people call us up and say, come and do your workshop here.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like the store. The focus has always been, at first it was like, okay, this is a fundraiser. And then very quickly we started to go, well, you know, we got to make sure that the products that we're selling reflect our values. Because, like, what's the purpose? You know, just making money, why are you any different? And so the whole fair trade effort came in. And then there's this link between between economic and racial justice and fair trade, because absolutely, I mean, who are the people who are getting exploited?
And fair trade has become very common buzzword now. And back in the very early 90s, Alice Christian, who was our store person then, she participated in some of the very first national fair trade conferences and did their first database. So we were even in on that national movement, even though we are a Vermont organization, but we did do that.
Yeah, and we still work in a national sort of sense, international sense, to sort of understand the reality of the movement and also help that movement see the interconnectedness that it's a part of. And I was wondering if Kina, if you could talk about a program that's being developed to show that interconnectedness within the scope of a workshop or a program.
Yeah, so a few months back, Amy, Alex and I randomly had a discussion about our strategic plan that we've been working on. And one of our main goals is to really intentionally focus more on the interconnectedness of our 3 areas of focus. And so then we're like, well, we should make a program. And so then we went to our interns and we're like, hey, help us make this program.
That's empowerment.
I'm like, finally, I get to tell somebody what to do. And so with the help of our interns, we created a new program that really dives into those issues and explores why they're important to look at altogether and how you can't look at one of the issues without talking about the other because they are so interconnected. And specifically thinking about how racial injustice and militarism created the conditions that are needed, or that create the conditions that make having fair trade necessary. And so that's a program that we're hopefully going to be bringing to the public sometime soon in the coming months, so look out for that. But in creating that program, it was really helpful for me because a lot of my work tends to focus a lot more on the racial justice aspects, just because for me that is something that's like really important because that's my everyday life as a person of color in the state. So to get to tap into the information that I had about fair trade and do it in a way that kind of helped me to solidify what I know, and then to have the chance to really start learning about militarism, because that's something that I really haven't had that much of a chance to do. So it was really awesome to get to really, like, in creating that program, also educating myself. And I think that is also something that's like really an important part of the center, is that like everybody that works there, whether you're a staff member or an intern or a volunteer, that you're always learning something, and just continuing to grow as individuals and then as an organization as a whole. So yeah, I'm really excited for that program. So
we also, as you were talking, it was reminding me I hadn't brought up the fact that we have been the fiscal sponsor for dozens and dozens, I don't know if it's added up to 100 now over the decades, of other smaller groups who didn't have their own 501c3 status, that just sort of, we helped either incubate groups until they got bigger and then eventually did become their own nonprofits, or other groups who just want to say small activists and don't want to have to deal with bookkeeping or whatever, that we continue to nurture those groups, because our organization can't do everything and doesn't want to try and do everything. So to help other groups do things sort of is part of our mission to help do as much social change as we can. And so besides the allied groups, we also have interns during the summer and then the 2 school semesters. And so to me, I always like to see those young people getting educated about stuff, because someday I won't be here to do it, and this stuff is not going away. And also we have dozens and dozens of volunteers, which we really couldn't operate without. And we've had volunteers all along. I mean, our organization started with volunteers, so it definitely got to a level of maturity when we were able to start raising money to have people working on all these issues full time. Trying to think of any
I
other.
think that's an important point, especially in thinking about the work that we do with institutions and
Actually,
with
not to
community
interrupt you,
groups.
but to interrupt you. So
Yeah.
Kyle started when she was a teenager as a volunteer. It's a long time ago.
I think I probably started as like a child when I was like visiting Vermont. I would go to the center and have to fold all the newsletters.
There you
like
go.
Our vacation, our family vacation. So threw me off track there.
Sorry.
Oh, memory lane. No, but the point I wanted to make was that there's nobody within our work that isn't able to see how they can understand things differently and in a more complete way with more education and work. And what came to mind that wasn't mentioned yet was facilitators. So we do programs throughout the state, sometimes privately with institutions, sometimes totally community-based, totally public, sometimes, most often, as like a community partnership. So an institution or organization or group will bring us, and then we'll also have it be open to the public. That's my favorite. Built-in audience, but also accessible to whoever wants to come and learn. And that our facilitation style, while it's different depending on the facilitation team that we have and the individuals that we have and their background and their expertise and the programs run the way that they feel is the most important and know to be meaningful. But also we come as facilitators and also as people who are going to learn from being there and from facilitating the discussion and being present in it. So many times when we bring a program, we have a general outline and a plan, and then we are tuned in to what the group needs, to where the group's at. We adjust accordingly if it's a multi-part program. We connect as a facilitation team and support each other as individuals as well as educators and leaders of the group. It's just, I think that even though it's so often done in an institutional setting, it's a very personal and intentional way of programming that is meant to change people's actions and behaviors and perspective, and not just check a box or so that people feel like they have a certificate and now they know the correct way to do something, but instead now they know how to think about it more and how to act differently and how to disrupt more things that perpetuate systems of oppression, I mean, that are part of oppression in a real action-oriented kind of way. And I think that that's part of what Kina was talking about with our staff and volunteers and board always, and interns always being learners, that it's also facilitators and it's also in those spaces live.
And it's all about participation. I mean, I remember saying that this is what democracy is about. Mm-hmm. This is what democracy looks like, is when people are paying attention, and you need to educate yourself to have a good democracy, but it's...
And it lasts far beyond the meeting,
yes.
Far beyond the action, far beyond the workshop, far beyond wherever you're at organizing. It's so important that it continues, because our socialization and the systems of oppression will continue in the negative. So we have to constantly be working to disrupt in a sustainable kind of way.
Yeah, John Tucker would be really proud of y'all. I mean, so we created the beginnings of this in the late 80s and early 90s in response to racial incidents that were just really hard and bad in Burlington. And the growth that you're talking about is really a testament to the ability to stay relevant and to stay woke, to use a term. It's true though, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll continue to do that.
For
Because
another 40 years, when you get to sit here and go, I remember when these old people came and did this. It was amazing.
But in it, not just for racial justice, but also for nonviolence, also for fair trade, for economic, livable wage workshops. I mean, there's a lot of workshops that we bring that same structure of education to.
Yeah.
So I think we're like out of time is what I saw, pretty close.
So, do you want to do the outro? Who's going to do the outro?
maybe,
Wendy?
I don't know. I have a quick note.
Oh, yes,
Is
sorry,
that every year we have our Ed Everett's Social Justice Activist Award celebration, where we honor the work of social justice activists who are doing really amazing work. And so this year we're going to be honoring Robin Lloyd and Loving Day, Vermont. And so the celebration is going to be happening on March 28th.
At the Echo Center.
Yes, from 6 to 9:30, there's going to be a chili dinner and music, and it's
Craig Mitchell.
yeah. So it's going to be a really fun time. So I definitely recommend that all of you put it on your calendar.
And I want to say who Ed Everett is.
Oh, great,
Because
yes.
Ed Everett, who it's named after, I mean, he was a major donor. He gave us his Air Force pension. He was turning swords into plowshares. But he also, for 14 years, did a weekly TV show here, or maybe he did it at the other
Channel
one.
15, yeah.
Channel 15. And then he also proofread the newsletter every single time. He would proofread it beforehand. I'd go to press, and then he would proofread it again and give me a list of all the corrections that we didn't get. And but he was just totally intertwined with our history, and I miss him dearly. He died a few years ago, but anyway, that's why we created the Social Justice Award named after him.
Great.
Yeah, and people can go to our website to find out about educational programs and more about getting involved, learning what we do. Do you wanna-
All right, that's cool.
Our website is pjcbt.org. Okay.